Hi there! Welcome to Pallet University. So, if you missed our last video, we did quite a lot of geology in it. And actually, I do apologize for this video being around a week late. This was supposed to have a completely different topic, but I really didn't like the script they came up with for it. And I didn't have time before last Saturday to make a new one, and record and edit it and all that good stuff, so I decided to just put it off a week. We will be revisiting that topic. I'm not going to spoil it for you, but we will come back to it. Probably in mid to late January. But today I'm just doing a quick video before I head home for the winter recess of my college. But today we are counting down some of the top 10 animals that I think would make great fossil Pokemon in the future. Now this is I didn't write a script for this, so if I ramble somewhat, I do apologize. It's mostly just because I'm very excited, because for this video I'm using some of my own personal fossils, which you will see throughout the video. All of these fossils I've either collected myself straight from the rock, grabbed it right out myself, or I bought them from a very reputable fossil website. Their link will be down below because I love them and everything they do. Hashtag not sponsored. Now just for a really quick recap of what kinds of fossil Pokemon we've had so far, biologically speaking. We've had everything from, dinosaurs with Tyrantrum and Aurorus, I'm really not quite sure what Bastiodon is supposed to be. I think it's supposed to be a Triceratops. We'll talk about that in a later part of this video. Then we've had some things like Lileep and Cradily, which are supposed to be crinoids, even though they look like plants but are really animals. There's been a very large amount of fossil Pokemon, but there are still quite a few that I think would make great Pokemon that just haven't been really thought of. Now, fossil Pokemon are really interesting in that they are all the rock type. And while I don't necessarily think that this is the way it should be, I understand why Game Freak chose to do it this way and has continued to do it for 20 years. So I'll respect that. So all of the following examples that I'll be giving in this list will also be part rock type. Alright, so with that little bit of background information out of the way, let's get into the countdown. Number 1, Plesio. Now, I very well may be pronouncing that incorrectly. If the person who named this species ever happens to see this, I do apologize. But it's this little guy. If you can see, this is a fly, and I'll make sure I put some pictures up of my fossils, some nice, doctored, some nice filtered, Instagram-worthy pictures. But this one kind of just goes out to all the various fossil insects, because as cool as things like dinosaurs and other really big animals are, these things far outweigh anything. Anything else that's ever lived. Insects are by far the most numerous animals on the planet today, and I guarantee it's been that way since animals came on land. Now this would be really interesting because we do have a rock bug fossil Pokemon in Anorith and Armaldo, but it'd be really interesting to see a fly. It'd obviously still be a rock bug type. You could give it levitate, you could make it a lot faster, you could make it function totally differently than Armaldo does, which is more of a stealth rock setter, rapid spinner, bulky Pokemon that hits rather hard, where this could be a fast stealth rock taunter, similar to how Aerodactyl works, but in a bug. Number 2, Enchotus. Now, this tooth looks like it belongs to something that was pretty big, but in reality, this tooth came from a fish that was maybe 3 feet long. But when you look at it compared to the size of some shark teeth, some sharks that are, 20 feet long, they're about this size. And because of this, this animal earned itself the nickname the Sabertooth Heron, even though it's really not related to herrings that closely at all. But it's a really interesting nickname for a really interesting fish. And I know there are already 3 families of rock water fossil Pokemon with Kabutops, Amistar, and Caracosta. But this one I think would be really neat, because those 3 are all, with the exception of Kabutops, they're all bulky. Relatively slow. Kabutops isn't that fast. But this I could see being sort of like a glass cannon, instead of being like a bulkier water type like its rock water fossil brethren. Because, there could even be some kind of lore where this thing would run around cracking open the shells of things like Amistar, although I don't believe these things lived 300 million years ago when the Pokedex states like Amistar and Kabutops lived. But that'd be a neat little piece of lore. Might not be accurate, but it'd be neat nonetheless. An animal like this, with teeth this big compared to its body, I would think it would have to have an ability like Strong Jaw, or maybe a different ability that increases Fang attack specifically for it that does the same thing as Strong Jaw. Pokemon does that all the time. So I could easily see them doing something like that for this Pokemon. Number 3, the Bellum Knights. Now, this is a sculpture. It is real fossils, but it's kind of doctored. It's very polished, and ignore this one down here. We're focusing on this animal up here. This animal is very closely related, in the grand scheme of things, to the animal that Omanite and Omastar are based off of, the Ammonite. The only real difference is that this one has a straight shell and this one has a coiled shell. They both lived in the water. They had a little squid coming out of here and just kind of squirted around. But I think this is a really interesting Pokemon, and I think that you could make a really neat Pokemon out of it. I said Pokemon, I meant animal. You could make a very interesting Pokemon out of this animal. And some people might be like, well, they're just copy-pasting Omanite. Well, I could see them potentially making it a different form of Omanite, also being rock water. Maybe making it a little faster, a little less physically bulky, maybe a little more physically attack-heavy even. Because this animal could move through the water rather quickly. That's why it's shaped like this. So it could sort of torpedo through the water. And it makes sense that, you know, extinct Pokemon would have different forms as well, because, you know, modern Pokemon can have different forms. Why can't extinct Pokemon? That just makes sense. For an ability, I could definitely see them having it keep Swift Swim, whether it's a brand new Pokemon or a new form of Omanite and Omastar. But maybe they could give it Speed Boost, even. That would be really neat. That would change the way this Pokemon operates completely. And I'd be completely fine with it either way, whether it's a new form or a brand new Pokemon altogether. Number 4, Carcharales Megalodon. This is about the size of a very large great white shark tooth. This is just relatively a baby Megalodon. You know, the teeth could get bigger than my entire hand, just for scale. But this is just such a neat animal. These animals were so cool. Imagine a great white shark, big enough to eat a whale. And that's basically Megalodon. You know, they put out a movie sort of recently about it. I haven't seen it, but I always hate movies like this and stuff on Shark Week. I'm going off on a little bit of a rant now. # side tangent. But like during Shark Week, they do all these like fake documentaries, and like there are people who still believe that this animal's still around, and it's just not. Like, if there were 40-foot sharks, you know, 40 to 50-foot sharks, probably even bigger. I think, you know, the bigger side of the estimates think that they could have got up to like 60 feet. If there were 60-foot sharks swimming around, we would know it. There would be no doubt. We would know they exist. But they're extinct. They don't live anymore. And I'm really surprised they haven't made more fish fossil Pokemon, because the amount of fish fossil animals is huge. Like, for vertebrates anyway, things with bones and, you know, spines, things like that, these far outweigh everything else. Everything else. So I'm really surprised, because there's a lot of really neat ones they could do too, like Megalodon. And granted, it's just a great big shark, but isn't that cool enough? Like, there's only one shark Pokemon in Sharpedo, and it's really only half a shark. But I could see this being played off as maybe a Rock Dark Pokemon, instead of a Rock Water, and have it say, you know, just be like, oh, it's the ancestor of Sharpedo, and have it have like a really sinister looking face to it, have it have some scars on the side of it. That'd be a really neat Pokemon. As well as maybe also having the ability Strong Jaw, maybe having it have something like Dry Skin, so it would be immune to water instead of weak to it if it were Rock Dark. I think that would be a really neat idea. I just thought of that off the top of my head. I think that'd be a great Pokemon. That Pokemon would be kind of broken, actually. But it'd obviously be a very powerful physical attacker. Probably kind of glass cannon-y as well. But I think that Megalodon would make a great Pokemon. Number 5, the Woolly Mammoth or Mastodon. Now, I know what you're thinking, we have a mammoth Pokemon. Mwah. Sort of, we do and we don't. Mamoswine is a pig, so it's like, it's not really a mammoth, but I feel like it's similar enough that we wouldn't want just a plain mammoth Pokemon. But just to talk about the fossil really quick before we get into too many details, this right here is the tooth of a baby woolly mammoth. The teeth of baby things are a lot easier to find, and they're a lot less expensive because they're smaller. Bigger things just tend to be more expensive. So most of the teeth that I have are from juvenile individuals. Now, even though this spot in the countdown is labeled as woolly mammoths or mastodons, those two animals are quite different. They're both in the same group of animals that are related to elephants, but they're on complete opposite sides of the tree, of that branch of, you know, the evolutionary tree of life. Sort of like how, you know, a capuchin monkey and humans are on the same branch, but not quite the same. So this spot in general is just going to be for that entire group of elephant-like mammals, whose names the name of the group I never can pronounce, because I'm like, do you pronounce the C in it? Do you not pronounce the C in it? That's something that I'll have to learn. But there's so many weird members of that group, like some had tusks on the top and the bottom. So you think of an elephant, you think it's got two tusks coming out of like up here and then its trunk. But there were some that had, you know, full tusks coming out of the top, and then some coming out of the bottom too. Then there were some that only had them coming out of the bottom. And there are some whose trunk, like bottom jaw, comes way out to here, and the trunk like sits on top of it, and it's its upper lip. There are a lot of really weird elephants in history, and I think any of them could make fantastic Pokemon. I don't really know what type they'd be. I wouldn't want to say ice, because then they're way too similar to Mamoswine. So I would think maybe a rock ground type, potentially maybe a rock grass type. You could have the wool be made out of grass or moss or something like that. That'd be a really neat idea. As for abilities, I think maybe Sap Sipper, depending on which route you go. A rock ground Pokemon with Sap Sipper would be crazy, because it takes away at 4 times weakness. As well as you could give it something like Guts, maybe Huge Power, depending on what you did with it stat-wise, whether you want to make it a bulky wall Pokemon or whether you want to make it a tank that hits really hard. That'd be just up to what Game Freak wants to decide. It's a neat little tooth. I like it. Number 6, Parasaurolophus. Now, that name kind of sounds like a mouthful, but I guarantee you've seen this dinosaur. It's, you know, a very fan favorite. It's the duck-billed dinosaur that's got the long thing coming off the back of its head. I'm sure I'll throw up a picture. But I have right here a vertebra, complete with the process where the spinal cord went. Spinal cord went right through there. Not necessarily of that animal, actually, in fact, it's definitely not that animal, but it's an animal closely related to it in the same group called Hadrosaurs. Now this is just a vertebrae from its tail. Now this is, you know, maybe a little bit smaller, not all that much smaller, than a vertebrae of mine, you know. So this was a very big animal. This is, you know, just looking at it, because it doesn't have some of the things that come off the spine at different spots. This is pretty close to the end of the tail. Maybe like the back third of the tail, definitely. So this was a very, very large animal. The fact that such a well-known dinosaur has not become a Pokemon yet is kind of beyond me. I could also see Game Freak making this maybe a rock grass type, or maybe also even a rock water type, because, you know, duck-billed dinosaur. Some of them were kind of wading animals that had teeth adapted for eating things like seaweed, algae, things like that. But I could even just see it being a rock type. I don't really see it being much else. However, if anybody, you know, is making a fan game, or if Game Freak ever decides to include the sound type, this would be a great animal for it, because that's what a lot of people think the big thing coming off the back of Parasaurolophus' head was for sound amplification for when it's calling out to find mates. A pretty appropriate ability for a Pokemon like this, because I imagine it wouldn't be very fast. It'd probably be kind of bulky. It would be like something also like Sap Sipper, similar to how we said with the Mammoth, or potentially Solid Rock. I think that'd be a really cool ability for it as well. Number 7, Mosasaurus. Now, since the first Jurassic World movie came out in 2015, everybody knows what a Mosasaurus looks like. And this is one of its teeth. Now, just for a really quick size comparison to one of the fossils from earlier, this is the mosasaur tooth. It's not from Mosasaurus itself, it's from a similarly sized animal closely related to it. This is the tooth of the Enchodus. This was about 40 plus feet long. This was maybe 3 or 4 feet long. Just for comparison. Now, you want to talk about some animals that really ruled the world? That was these guys. Yeah, everybody talks about how T-Rex is the king of the dinosaurs. As you saw in Jurassic World, you know, all else equal, Mosasaurus would easily kill a Tyrannosaurus, or really any other dinosaur. Just because they're so massive. You know, its head probably would take up most of the room that I'm sitting in right now, especially toward the end of the Cretaceous. You know, these guys died out when the dinosaurs did. So about 65, 66-ish million years ago. They were just incredibly massive. They were the top predators anywhere they were. Now, I'd be really hard-pressed to think of a type besides rock water for these things, because technically they're lizards that just evolved to go back into the water. But, you know, they don't breathe water, so it's not like they're a fish. So maybe rock dark? But we already kind of talked about that, so I don't really know. Maybe just a plain rock type would also be kind of appropriate for them. And maybe depending on how they wanted to do it, maybe a rock steel type would be kind of neat as well. And I think the best ability for these things would definitely be Intimidate, because I don't even know how to describe. If I saw one of these in real life swimming at me, I don't know what I would do. There'd be nothing, no shark cage would protect you. This thing could easily kill anything that's alive today. With the exception of probably the biggest whales. You know, blue whales that are 100-ish feet long. It probably wouldn't attack one of those. If it did, it probably could kill it though. Number 8, the Ichthyosaurs. Now, since we're talking about marine aquatic reptiles, these guys are actually very well known as well. You know, they're called Ichthyosaurs, and that literally means fish lizard. Which is really appropriate, because looking at them, they look very fish-like. They have very large eyes, they're very streamlined, especially toward the end of their run. They technically died out when the dinosaurs did, although they were well on their decline by then. They had their heyday around the time dinosaurs were just getting started. So these guys are pretty old. This right here is one of their vertebrae. This is a massive vertebrae. This is something about the size of what you'd see on a, you know, maybe an Asian elephant, maybe something a little smaller than that, but not much smaller. And typically when things are in the water, they don't need as big a vertebrae, which is why this is so thin, because, you know, all of their weight is supported by the water. And once again, I don't really know what type to give these things besides rock water. So I guess that would have to be it. These things were so adapted to living in the water that, you know, you think reptile, you think they lay eggs, but these guys actually didn't. These guys gave live birth, which is a really neat adaptation, because it's really counterintuitive, because things come on land, and because they're on land, they evolve to have an egg with a shell, but then they go back to the water, and we're like, well, I can't get out of the water now to go lay my eggs, so they adapted and evolved live birth, and I think that's really neat. You know, there are some of these that have really big, kind of bulbous bodies that don't really look streamlined at all. So depending on which kind of ichthyosaur they choose, there are some that are a lot smaller, sort of like torpedo looking. So I could see them either having like swift swim, I could see them having something like water absorb. Depending on the design that they go for, it could have really any number of abilities. Number 9, Triceratops. Other than T-Rex and Velociraptor, this is probably the most easily recognizable dinosaur, just because it is so unique looking with its huge frill and its huge horns just sticking out from its face. And in fact, that's what Triceratops means, is three-horned face. Now, they sort of have a Pokemon based off of this. I think that's what, like I said earlier, I think that's what Mastodon is supposed to be based off of, but I really don't know. Mastodon's just a weird Pokemon. I don't particularly like Mastodon. Shieldon, I think, is real adorable, but Bastiodon's face is just so weird. So here we have a Ceratopsian, likely Triceratops, but I don't know for sure. This is one of its toe bones, and I have it in this case because it is actually very, very fragile. And in fact, most of my fossils are. I try not to handle them unless I'm doing educational things with them, which of course this is. But this one actually is so rare, and actually where it's found, it was found in Alberta, Canada. And due to certain laws, you have to have proper identification for these things when you have them. So this has a disposition number down at the bottom, and it's, you know, very official. I have to keep this card with it at all times. There are certain rules that I have to follow in keeping this thing. But I love it. This is one of its toe bones. So there's, you know, as I'm sure you know, in like your hands, your fingers, there's multiple bones. This is, I think, this bone right here, the first phalanx, which is the singular of phalange, which is all the finger bones. But such a neat bone to go with such a neat animal. Now the immediate sort of thought to go with any Ceratopsian, because of the big frill and that they're known to be kind of defensive and that there's always scenes between them facing off against a T-Rex, is to make it rock steel. Which, again, is sort of what they were going for with Bastiodon, but it just, in my opinion, just didn't work. But I think a really neat idea would maybe be rock fire, with, you know, the horns being made out of fire, the frill maybe being made out of fire, maybe just having fire coming around the outside of it. I think that'd be really cool. As well, you could have it have the ability flash fire, you can have it have the ability solid rock, any number of abilities like that would work. Magma body, is magma armor, that's the ability, I know Pokemon. Or flame body as well. Such a cool bone from such a cool animal. This is my most recent edition, and I'm just in love with it. I've only taken it out twice. And finally, number 10, the woolly rhinoceros. Earlier, we talked about the woolly mammoth, but, you know, when it's cold, a lot of things get hairy, to put it in a weird way. And one of the animals that grew a lot of hair was a species, or I guess a couple species, of rhinoceros. And I am lucky enough to have a bone from one of them. Now, you might notice that parts of it are very dark brown, and some of it is kind of a lighter, almost white color. That's because when this was prepared, which is, you know, the process of taking it out of the ground and making it so it doesn't fall apart, because as we've discussed, fossils are very fragile. In my opinion, this was not done very well. As you can see, a lot of it didn't last, which is why, you know, the brown stuff is some resin that was put on the outside, and a piece actually just cracked off as I was talking. But that's not important. Some of it has been falling off, so I don't like having this fossil out often. This is actually a leg bone. As you can see, right here is the joint where it articulated to, I believe this is a right tibia, if I had to guess. I don't know for sure. It's either a tibia or a radius, which are the, you know, your shin bone or one of your arm bones. My guess would probably be a tibia, a shin bone, but like I said, I don't know for sure. But the woolly rhinoceros was a really cool animal that I think would make a really convincing ice type. You know, you could make its horn made out of ice. You could make it, you know, white like a polar bear almost. You could make it have a lot of the same qualities that something like mammal swine has. You know, because mammal swine's tusks are supposedly made out of ice. You could have it be a very similar thing, with a rock ice typing. As bad as that typing is, it would be very fitting for something like a woolly rhinoceros. And that is my list for the top 10 animals that I think would make really cool fossil Pokemon. You know, I've made lists like this before, and I actually have a typed up script that contains completely different animals, but I really want to show off some of the fossils that I have on hand, and show that, you know, anybody can really become a fossil collector if you have a little bit of money, like I used to. I've spent, altogether, you know, I've got boxes and boxes of these things, and altogether I've probably spent upwards of $500 to $600 total in the past 5 years that I've been collecting. But you don't need to have that much money to go out and collect fossils. All you need is to look up fossil sites around where you live and just go out and look for stuff. You know, there are certain laws with things that have bones, but for things like clamshells, things like brachiopods, which are similar to clams but different, you know, you can just go out and pick stuff up off the ground. Sometimes it's really that easy. So if you're interested in fossils, let me know down below. I would love to really help you any way that I can find fossils near you. Or also hit me up on Twitter at Pallet_you. So that is going to do it for this episode. Keep an eye out next week for our weekly lecture, Saturday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. If you have any thoughts about any fossils that you would like to, you know, see become Pokemon, let me know down below. Follow me on Twitter at Pallet_you, and check out our main channel, Cool Trainer Gavin, in which we do Let's Plays, you know, a lot of Smash content lately. Check that out as well. And as always, there's a time and place for everything.